let's jump in to Reimagining Lean. We're at a pivotal moment in the United States. Since 2003, we've really been an invented here, made there, and imported back economy and, more relevantly, a society. And you're all familiar with the consequences of that to our communities, to our manufacturing facilities, to our workforce and families. And you probably personally know many, many people that have been adversely affected by us becoming an invented here and made there society. And starting in 2019, a shift got underway, and that shift is continuing. However, there are a lot of headwinds. You're familiar with these headwinds, so I'm not going to go over them in any detail. So you're familiar with these headwinds, such that U.S. manufacturing productivity and U.S. manufacturing competitiveness continue to decline. And what goes along with that decline in productivity and competitiveness is that even though the federal government is in many ways leveling the playing field or even incenting things, the tide is still going out. And so success for our 250,000 manufacturers, small, medium, and large in the United States is not a sure thing. So in my view, we really have a national imperative to transform company productivity and competitiveness. And just one of many surveys, this one by Bain & Company, says that top-tier companies are 40% more productive, 30 to 50% more profitable, but they're only 10 to 15% of companies. So how do we go about raising the tide for productivity and competitiveness? And there's really four things that we can do: advanced manufacturing, better educating and upskilling our workforce, Industry 4.0, and what we're here to talk about today is lean manufacturing. And lean provides tailwinds. And you're all familiar with how when lean is adopted in an individual company, unquestionably productivity improves, the company's competitiveness improves. And when we're talking about competitiveness, really, the real competition is foreign imports, and the real opportunity for competitiveness is growing also our export base for U.S. manufacturing. So we know lean works. We know it delivers significant improvements. However, there are two problems. At the company level, advocates such as yourselves are troubled. And you're troubled that lean's not delivering the full range of benefits and impact that it can. And then there's a national problem, which is that lean is producing sustained productivity gains by just 10 to 15% of companies. And so this initiative around Reimagined Lean aims to bring about a 2 to 3 times increase in adoption that will result in a step change in U.S. productivity at a national scale. That's the context for what we're doing in the area of lean manufacturing. So where is that 2 to 3x going to come from? It's going to come from crossing the chasm from innovators and early adopters. Even though lean's been around for 40 years, it really hasn't crossed the chasm. And what's across the chasm are people that are familiar with but not deploying lean, people that are deploying lean but in a very, very limited use case, people that started with lean and discontinued it, and then people who have very, very different persona, very, very different thinking styles, and that for those people, lean has not really been appealing to them thus far. So when we're talking about crossing the chasm, we're going to use the expression crossing the chasm from the early adopters to the mainstream. And these are the demographics in the mainstream that we're really focusing on attending to. This work that you're seeing today is the result of a lean collaborative effort where we pulled together 20 thought leaders and influencers around North America in the lean community. We conducted statistical research through a lean questionnaire, which continues, and we're expanding that. And we did research through work with clients and prospects that we could call ethnographic research, deep dive research with our clients and prospects. And so the call to action has really been very simple. It's simple to say anyway. All right. And the call to action is don't mess with the tools and the methods. They work. Let's identify and challenge beliefs and orthodoxies that might be holding back the adoption of lean. Let's from that develop some new insights. Let's experiment, and with those insights, validate them, iterate them where appropriate. And then what we're about right now is now we've conducted those first 4 aspects of the call to action, and we're beginning to now broadly disseminate our findings to the broader lean community. So now I'm going to just jump right in to the facts. Lean works. 53% of companies surveyed, of over 300 companies that we surveyed, 53% achieved significant or better gains. That's the various colors of green. And we asked people just to tell us qualitatively what you see as the level of gains that you've achieved. We didn't ask for a lot of definition there. What's interesting is that with 53% achieving significant or better gains, and the visible gains being in there as well, that lean is not widely recognized as it could accomplish those kinds of gains. So there's some things that are interfering with people's recognition that lean can be a huge boost, huge tailwinds to improving productivity and competitiveness. We looked deeper behind that, and we asked people to categorize dimensionally their accomplishments in lean, and we asked people if you had measured your accomplishments, what gains you actually were able to measure. And we found that there were 3 tiers of gains. And again, this is common sense for you as lean practitioners. We found that there was common sense that very high gains averaged about 80%. And you can see that there were 26% in that tier. High gains averaged 40%, and moderate gains, I apologize, averaged 20%. There's a lesson here, though, that people that accomplished very high, went about it. If you characterize what lean looked like in their company, you would see that the very high people had different characteristics of what lean looked like in their company. The high performers had different characteristics, and the moderate performers also had differentiating characteristics. So if we take the inverse of this, what we can say is that we can talk to decision makers about the targeted gains that they have and how the level of target influences lean deployment. So if we're talking to somebody and we say, well, what kind of gains do you want in quality, or what kind of gains do you want in throughput? And if the gains that they're talking about are 20% moderate, then we have one approach to going after moderate gains. If, on the other hand, people say, I really want to blow the roof off of my gains in that area very high, then we have the opportunity to talk about the characteristics of a lean organization that accomplishes very high. So it's a way of having the level of accomplishment drive the conversation about how we're going to adopt lean in that enterprise. And no surprise, the gains have been evenly distributed across performance areas, and no surprise either that safety shows the biggest bump up of any of the dimensions. So we started to poke at orthodoxies and practices, hidden assumptions, beliefs, rules that are influencing the adoption of lean. And these are the 5 that jumped out. So one of the things is it takes several years to get significant gains. And what the data says is, yeah, pretty much that's right. You can see the dotted line, and people that have stayed with lean for more than 6 years have the highest level of gains from people that adopted lean for 1 or 2 years. Makes perfect sense. But then there's this outlier of companies that produce strategic gains in under a year. And we were very, very interested to take a deeper dive in companies that achieve that level of performance. So we actually asked members of our Lean Collaborative, what's been your experience with companies achieving strategic gains in under a year? And we got case study examples, many of them, of how companies went about doing that and the kind of goals that they were able to accomplish. So let me show you representatives. So this high level, very high level of lean, we know is achievable. That people had performance before, as part of beginning lean, they established some targets, they had long-term goals, and then they had actual performance at the end of 6 months. I can see that in many cases, in this particular example, they either met or achieved their target within 6 months. So we're going to be talking a little bit later about specifically what did we learn about how companies that achieve that high level of performance within 6 months, how did they go about doing that? And we're going to talk about it in a way that is replicable by you. We also did sentiment analysis, where we asked people in their own language to talk about gains. 48% reported operational gains, 35% reported culture gains, and 17% they did not report gains. And we've, since doing the initial questionnaire, have done some follow-up research, and our follow-up research is indicating that about 66% of companies now, when they undertake lean, are undertaking lean to achieve both operational gains and cultural gains. So we got some lessons for getting started. We asked people, how did you get started with lean? And we correlated how they got started with the level of accomplishments that they said they got from lean. And so there are specific things that people said they did in order to get started. Solve specific important problems. Go, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, excuse me, that expression, inch wide, mile deep. The mile deep meaning go deep into one problem, the inch wide meaning familiarize people broadly, but go deep into one problem. To openly discuss the what's in it for me type benefits, to not presume that there's a single answer to that, but to have that as exploratory conversations throughout the facility. To use terms that work for culture. Some people actually said that one of the things inhibiting lean was that lean ease type of language. So there were lessons for getting started. And we had things that one could say is, don't do that. Don't pick easy targets. Don't go after too many things. Don't just discuss benefits and move on. Discussing benefits should be an ongoing part of your strategic change approach. Don't just have a lean event. And I think you're all familiar with that. Just doing classroom training doesn't produce results. So then we really looked at the relationship between the adoption of lean, the maturity of lean in a company, and the results. And so no surprise, the broader the continuous improvement, the higher the gains. And you can see here, orange represents tools specifically by lean experts. You know, you've got a couple of lean black belts doing some projects. And you can see that overall, that kind of approach yielded mostly marginal gains. All the way up, higher, more and more green, darker green, okay, is that lean got adopted not only as methodology, but lean got adopted as a continuous improvement culture in specific areas, growing to be a continuous improvement culture throughout manufacturing, and in some cases becoming that kind of dotted green, becoming a continuous improvement lean enterprise. So yet, when we talk to our lean collaborative members about how did they talk about culture engagement, we found out that they were actually sidelining it in how they introduce lean to their clients. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. The second, we poked the bear about this notion that is very widely held, that lean must be led by executives. And what we found out is that senior champions are not essential for visible gains. However, senior champions are necessary to achieve the highest levels of results. So this comes back to the point that we made in the first two slides, that in talking to an executive, the level of gains they want to accomplish is going to drive the level of support that senior champions provide. And we should be talking about that up front. So senior leadership, achieving those bigger gains is unique culture change. We all know that. And so senior leadership is necessary for that broad continuous improvement culture. But it's not required if what we want to do are just really moderate gains or some visible gains. So now, when people ask, how much do I need to be personally involved? The answer to that is, well, what results are vital to you? This is kind of common sense. We also asked people about the top issues. And they said the number one issue, and these are people that have implemented lean and stayed with it over some period of time. And the number one issue in those companies was the lack of understanding about lean. What lean is, why we're doing it, the benefits we could expect. You know, the lack of results is not an issue. Or we saw that by and large, lean's delivering results. So in looking at this version called Lean Reimagined, we need to address head on that we're not doing a very good job of conveying to people and having people internalize what lean is, the why of lean, the benefits of lean. So this idea that we can just deliver one kind of message and people will get it, we needed to challenge that orthodoxy. And one of the things in challenging that is that we recognize, using design thinking, a notion there is this idea of persona. And we recognize that we've been talking, if you will, to this forward-looking Alex persona. And Alex, a gender neutral Alex, is strategic, big picture, imaginative, innovative. They take action on lean because they see implicitly what the possibility is. And then there's this other persona we call Jamie, the mainstream persona, that's short-term and action-oriented and very practical. And that we need to talk to these two different persona in a very, very distinct way. And implicitly, Lean's been speaking to the Alex persona. So if you think about this, you've probably done a Myers-Briggs or some, personality assessment over your careers, and you recognize that you have a particular style that you communicate in, but others don't necessarily have that same style. And when people communicate to you in a style that doesn't match your style, you sometimes struggle with, well, get to the point, or what's the big picture here? Or there are questions that arise in the back of your mind that when they're unanswered, get in the way of you hearing the message that the other person is trying to deliver. So that a key insight is we need to be speaking to both of these distinct persona in order to expand the adoption of lean. Now, we did some very simple research. We said to Google, Wikipedia, and we also asked Chat GPT, what's lean manufacturing? And this is what answers we got back. And when you see these answers, you can see that culture and engagement is sidelined in the answer. Lean manufacturing is a production method aimed at reducing times. Lean manufacturing is a method that focuses on minimizing waste. There's very little, if anything, about culture in how lean is portrayed and commonly understood. And yet we all know lean culture is essential. So we challenge those orthodoxies. And we found that those orthodoxies are actually inhibiting the adoption of lean. So I just want to invite you right now to come off of mute, and let's take a few minutes, and I'd like to hear from some people. What if we could repeal those orthodoxies? What would that make possible in your world around the adoption of lean? So I want you to think about three key things in terms of organizing the value of today. All right, I want you to think about the orthodoxies and assumptions that you find are limiting you, all right, that you find that they're out there as you're talking to executives, or you're out there on the shop floor and you keep bumping up against these orthodoxies, or you actually find on self-reflection that the orthodoxies are kind of where you're coming from. Then let's take a look and make note of any key facts, any insights, any ideas that you think would be useful to help you get a broader adoption of lean in your clients, or move them up from lean being used in just a specific area to lean being used more broadly. Or for a client just saying, I just want you to do lean training, to now adopting lean to go after specific results. So as we go through this, make note of some key takeaways, and also make note of things that we stir the pot for your own thinking about what you could be doing to better have your clients adopt lean. One final thing before we move into the next session, we did ask people about digital tools and Industry 4.0, because we see that it's inevitable that down the road, the analytics, the visualization tools, the data collection tools of Industry 4.0 will come into play with the lean world. And what we found is we're still at the stage of very, very early adoption, that only about 10% of the responding companies were doing anything in the area of Industry 4.0. And then here's a list of what they were doing. Again, I'm going to make these slides available to you, so you don't have to take notes on any of this. Okay, so we're about to shift gears. So I want to remind you that what we're aiming for is we're aiming to cross the chasm. We're aiming to address lean by people familiar with but not deploying it. We're aiming to expand lean beyond limited use, have companies that have discontinued lean pick it up in a new spirit, and address people, the mainstream persona that a lot of small and medium-sized manufacturers have. We want to have lean address people with these different personas. So I want to do kind of a reimagined exercise for how we do the rest of the conversation. So I want to poke the bear in this kind of reimagined lean spirit and reframe the problem. So in many ways, we could say that throughout its life over the last 40 years, lean's been framed as the Toyota production system. Although not always with that headline, that's been the frame. And that framing very successfully appealed to the early adopter. That's very future-oriented, sees possibilities. But if you put yourselves in the shoes of a small and medium-sized manufacturer, they're in the business day by day, week by week, dealing with problems, running the business, improving things. And for reasons we hear over and over again, the problem's been they just don't get what lean can do for them, or they're not committed, and therefore we just have to live with that, and we'll scale back what we want to do with the client and what the accomplishments will be. We just have to live with that and scale it back. In reframing the problem, I want to say the following. Again, this is that kind of poke the bear spirit. I want to say that lean has a relevance and friendliness problem. That we do not speak lean, present lean in a way that makes it highly relevant. Meaning relevant, it's addressing business issues that are keeping people awake, that are holding back the performance of the company. It's not addressing business issues in a timely way, as a perception, not as a fact. I can't see the immediate benefit of doing lean. The second is lean has a friendliness problem. All right, we don't convey lean in a way that doesn't disrupt operations. We don't necessarily, people are concerned that it's going to raise personnel issues, that it doesn't fit with the operations, that they can't take people off the assembly line or their work cell in order to train them on lean. So we're going to approach lean like if we can solve this relevance and friendliness problem, that's critical to crossing the chasm. And there are really 4 ways that we can make lean more relevant and friendly. They're probably wondering, well, how are we going to do that? So the 4 ways are: 1, challenge the orthodoxies. We've been talking about those as hidden headwinds. So that we have to talk with the mainstream executives and the mainstream workforce we have to use a different way of talking with them. They have a different persona. We need to deliver significant results and eliminate significant pain points rapidly. And we need to employ a kind of change strategy that reduces friction and resistance. And if we did all of those four things, we would make lean more relevant and friendly. So we're going to actually imagine how we might talk in this reimagined lean world, how we might speak to the client's persona. And in a meeting, you're typically going to have both types of persona, but recognize that the mainstream persona likes to see how it's done and likes to see specifics, that there's a natural flow to the questions that people need answered. And it kind of goes from familiarizing themselves with lean to really considering lean to taking action to actually deploy lean. And if that flow of questions being answered is interrupted, then the process of people deciding to act gets interrupted. So we want to introduce this idea of this natural flow of questions to be answered, and that there are some dynamics in how we talk to people that, as we've tested these out, our Lean Collaborative has found these to be just critically important dynamics. And again, you may be doing some of these right now, but I'm just kind of underscoring them. The first dynamic is that it's about people internalizing the answer to these natural questions versus you providing one. And so in that regard, discussion takes precedence over presentation. And as we work this through with our Lean Collaborative members, what we discovered is they saw how much they were spending time in Lean answering questions, making presentations, rather than having discussions and having people discover and internalize the answer for themselves. So with that in mind, we want to reimagine a conversation. I'd like you to think about a conversation that you recently had where you were introducing lean. You might have been a conversation where you were introducing lean to executives and executive team. It might have been a conversation where you're already working with a company, but you're introducing lean to supervisors and workers on the shop floor. So I want you to actually take a moment, put yourself in a real situation. And then as we talk through these new conversations, reflect on how the interaction might have gone differently from how it went. So just take a moment and get something specific in mind. And so as we go through this, the kind of orangey tangerine color is going to be reflective of somebody in the client system, and the darker brown, black color is going to be you. And we're going to be talking about the questions that are on your client or prospect's mind, and then the conversations that you're having to address those questions. All right, let's go. So we start every conversation with, I've heard about lean. Because people have a notion about lean, and the first thing we want to do is we want to understand what people have heard about lean, because right up front then you know about where they have accurate perceptions or misperceptions, and by what they say, you start to have a take on what persona are people you're talking to. So every conversation starts with, what have you heard about lean? All right, and then what exactly is lean? So that's the next conversation to have. And we're now going to introduce something that's really you might get thrown back a little on this. So, there's an expression, hidden in plain sight. When you go into a company, all right, and you look around their facility, you see opportunities for eliminating waste, eliminating bottlenecks, adding value, and for you, they are in plain sight. And the challenge or the work to be done is then to have them in plain sight for the client system and to give them the tools to address it. So when people say, what exactly is lean? We want to give you a very different way to answer that question. We want you to try on that lean goes after waste, bottlenecks, and value that's hidden in plain sight. Just like the white shaggy dog on the white shag rug, that some people will see it, some people won't. Executives will see waste, all right, that others won't see. People on the shop floor will see waste that executives won't see. So waste, bottlenecks, and value is hidden in plain sight, and lean goes after that. And how does it do that? You create employees become an army of creative problem solvers, continuously improving results. So right here, culture and employee engagement is now front and center in how we define lean. And the last thing is that lean provides a common language and a set of proven methods. So lean goes after waste, hidden in plain sight. Employees become an army of creative problem solvers, continuously improving results, speaking a common language, and using a set of proven methods. So again, want to welcome people to come off of mute, and how might this definition enable you to better connect? So what can lean do for me? Let's talk about priorities and pain points. Regardless of where you're having this conversation, we want to focus the attention not on what lean as an abstract can do for people, but we want people, when you ask what can lean do for me, we want people talking about what their priorities and their pain points are. And we want to use the working definition of lean to elicit answers. So where do you see waste and bottlenecks hidden in plain sight? What could lean do if you had an army of creative problem solvers? So we want to use this definition of lean to elicit what people can see for themselves as the value of adopting lean. And how does it accomplish that? This is where people who are the mainstream persona want examples. So this is where you illustrate types of waste, and you can really talk about that in the conversation very specifically. So here's the common language. How does lean work? When you can talk about it, you can start to see it more, it's more visible. And then there are tools for going after waste once you've spotted it. And, you're all familiar with how lean can reduce the non-valuated time in the value stream. And, using value stream mapping as a tool. So we want people to understand that lean has a structure, it has a terminology that's beneficial, and it has a structure, a set of methods and tools that help to drive for the improvements you're aiming for. So again, we're following a flow, regardless of where you're having this conversation. We're following a flow of the kinds of questions that people have in the back of their mind that moves them from a familiarity with lean, from let's say an inspired event of lean, like a lean conference or a lean tour, all right, to actually activating them to take action to implement lean in their own organization. And so we also surveyed what are the lean tools, and we really found that there were the top 6 tools. And this probably comes again as no surprise to you or folks on this call, but it's a way of talking to people and saying there are proven methods, and there really are, we don't need to introduce 20 methods. Really, for your organization, for the problems you're going to go after, they'll be your top 6. They may not be this top 6, but they'll be your top 6 proven methods that are the methods we're going to use in your organization. And then there's the question of what's it going to require? And we're saying that these questions need to be answered, and many cases we're leaving it up for grabs, assuming that people can answer the question for themselves rather than they need our assistance to prompt the answer. So what's it going to require? And we want to be very specific here. So we want to be able to tell an executive what are the few practices that you'll need to implement. We want to be telling a supervisor what are the few practices you'll be implementing. We want to tell employees what are the few things that are going to be different for you. So we want to be walking in the shoes of people and giving them a few simple practices that we found that in many cases, people just leaving it up to other people to figure out what the things are that they should be doing. We're just saying things like you need to support lean without saying very specifically, what is it that you need to be doing? People also feel that lean is risky because it's a break in the status quo, and it is. So there are risks, and the key to addressing the risks is talking about them and then how to reduce them. And you're familiar with some of these risks right here. And there'll be other risks. The important thing is that we're actually talking about the risks. We're talking about whatever the fear factor is, because whatever we're not talking about is going to run the show in the background and generate resistance. And then how do we get started? And again, we're talking about a way of getting started that we call rapid deployment, which is a way of addressing an urgent objective in that first 6 months. And here's a template that our Lean Collaborative effort has designed that's a reproducible template. It starts with over the first 4 to 6 weeks, you're doing preparation work. You're working to identify the priority goals and the urgency. You may have your own assessment methodologies that you're using in order to help do that. You're answering the question, why are we doing that? What are we doing? How are we doing it? What's in it for me? And you're answering it not just at the executive level, you're preparing the organization for a rapid deployment of lean. And then you're having the conversations that have previously been undiscussed, like the fear factor conversation around risk. Then what does that first 4 to 5 months of rapid deployment look like? Well, you're identifying the first target and the process bottlenecks that you need to eliminate. And then as you look at those process bottlenecks that you need to eliminate, then you're identifying specific people and specific lean methods and the specific leadership practices. So this is all planning that you can do very rapidly. And then when it comes to executing, we're executing in terms of short sprints, each sprint aimed at a specific bottleneck. And at the end of that sprint, you've made an impact on the bottleneck, you're recognizing people, you're tracking progress, you're moving on then to the next sprint aimed at the next bottleneck. And so in this particular way, you're actually building a microculture by going after results and engaging people around specific results. And then we're doing change strategy with a soft touch. And we're surfacing concerns and rapidly addressing them. We're building commitment over time. We're not expecting commitment up front in order to move on. So we're building motivation, building commitments, introducing new practices over time, not expecting that it's going to be flawless, overnight. And we keep communicating the why, the what, the how, and what's in it for me to whoever the relevant audience is that you're working with at any point in time. We know from our survey and from your experience that lean evolves over time, that there are techniques and practices that you'll introduce in that first phase, and then those practices will get embedded in the culture, and you'll start introducing other practices over time. And so we want to prepare the client that we're going to start with a few practices, get them well established, and then as we go after additional challenges, we have other practices and methods in our toolkit, and we'll be introducing those as relevant to the particular challenge areas that you ask us to go after. And so it's really this phased approach of an initial orientation to develop a common understanding and language, to break the problem into pieces, to rapidly deploy in a priority area and deliver early improvements, improve lean works, to do action learning, all right? We're training people involved in the phase. We're orienting people in that preparation phase, but we're only training people just in time to the methods that they'll be involved in at the time that they need them. We're rapidly iterating to remove barriers, and we're establishing kind of cadence of improvement. And then over time, we're iteratively deploying this in additional areas over time. So that's this phased approach that strikes a much higher resonance of friendliness and relevance to the mainstream persona. And these are some of the benefits that members of our Lean Collaborative found in using this storyline and organizing their presentations and their discussions using this storyline. And that people found that the material flowed a lot easier, that they got a lot more better understanding on the part of the people that they were talking to. I'm going to be providing a kind of quick checklist around this storyline. You'll have that in your handout. So in summary, the why of Lean Reimagined is to increase productivity, to bring about a sustained revitalization of U.S. manufacturing. The what is a 2 to 3 times increase in the adoption of Lean, and the how is making Lean relevant and friendly for the mainstream, speaking to the mainstream persona, iterating for rapid results, discussing these hidden questions, building motivation and commitment over time, and then raising the bar, continuously creating an environment in which you're continuously raising the productivity and competitiveness bar for the company. So take a moment, think about now some of the key facts, insights, ideas, and what you could do, taking advantage of those. And again, I want to open it up for discussion about what can you now see to do. Let's focus particularly on the one takeaway that you will try out as a result of today's conversation. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for participating today. All right, I know you're all Lean experts, you're all Lean advocates, you all have, if you will, the things that you think are the most valuable way to do things. And what our aim in today is to really broaden your perspective so that when you're running across obstacles, you now have more arrows in your quiver to be able to address the kinds of issues that come up as you're trying to have people adopt a lean and, if you will, level up their efforts in lean. So thank you very much. We're about to begin a second phase of our Reimagined Lean collaborative. And if you're interested in participating in that phase, drop me an email note and we can talk about the kind of participation that you like in a way that's mutually beneficial to you and what we're trying to accomplish here in the Lean Reimagined collaboration. So again, thank you all very, very much for participating today.